Welcome everybody. This is the launch of the Co-operative Councils Innovation Network Beyond Asset Transfer report. I'm very excited to be launching this report today. My name's Councillor Sharon Taylor. I'm chair of the Co-operative Councils Innovation Network. I'm also leader of Stevenage Council, and very pleased to be here with you all this morning, co-operators, to launch this very exciting piece of work from the network. We have an absolutely stellar panel here to speak to you on the webinar this morning, which we're very pleased to have our panellists with us, starting with Baroness Glenys Thornton. Welcome, Glenys. We're very pleased to have you with us this morning. John Copps, who is a managing consultant from Mutual Ventures. Councillor Joyce McCarty, who is Cabinet Member for Inclusive Economy at Newcastle City Council, and Gray Hill, the Director of Insole Trust in Cardiff. So a very good panel to speak to us here this morning. I'm going to start just by telling you a little bit about our network and what we do. Many of you will be aware of the network already, and we are a network that's been around for many years now, and a very fast growing network. I like to call us the fastest growing network in local government, but that may be, I'm hoping that that's true, possibly I think is the word. So we are all about our councils driving social innovation and making sure that we put people first. Fundamentally, we are action focused, and that's what this morning is about, delivering reports from real innovation and research that's going on in our councils right now. We are membership based, so our membership, as with all good cooperatives, lead the network and design and shape all of the work we do. We're open to all UK councils, and we have a number of councils from different political persuasions, and we're part of the local government family because we are a special interest group of the Local Government Association. And our membership has grown phenomenally over the last few years. The network was set up by myself, Steve Reed, who is now Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, and Jim McMahon from Oldham, who is also an MP and a Shadow Minister. And we now have 87 members of the network, 14 supporters. So we've got 33 full councils in membership, 19 associate members and 35 affiliate members. And just to show you who some of our members are, if I can have the next slide, there we are. And we are 33 councils. We cover over 9 million citizens in the UK, and we have combined budgets of around 14 billion. So a network with some significant clout and firmly rooted within the cooperative movement. And you'll see there some of our long-standing members and some of our very newest members. And we are always delighted to welcome new councillors on board, and you'll see the biggest council in the UK, Birmingham City Council, joined us fairly recently. We also have all of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority on board, and many of the constituent members of the Combined Authority in Manchester. But we also have a number of members who are parish and town community councils, as well as councils of all sizes. Next slide, please, John. So our launch of our report this morning, this is the latest Co-operative Councils Innovation Network report. It originated in Newcastle, and the work was completed by Newcastle City Council. Newcastle were originally awarded the funding to explore what works in community asset transfer, the factors that contribute to success, and how to overcome some of the common barriers. As the project was being completed, of course, we were all hit by the COVID-19 pandemic on in our communities, and our members and the partner community organisations found themselves at the centre of the local response to COVID. So we secured the additional support of affiliate members, Mutual Ventures and Bates Wells, to help review the findings and look at this, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and what that had done in terms of the use of community assets. So that's added an additional dimension, which I think is a really valuable one, to the work that we've done. So thank you to those. I know some of you have put in some questions in advance, but can I just say now, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat. If you start your question with an asterisk, so that we can see the questions really easily. So as we launch our report this morning, what we want to make sure is that we do make effective use of community assets. It's critical to a well-functioning place and strong, resilient communities. But we all know that transferring assets is not always as straightforward as perhaps it could be. And our cooperative values continue to be a real force for good in our communities. So we want to do this and to help with our communities, supporting them when we transfer our assets. COVID-19 has shown us just how valuable some of these community assets are, and transferring them to communities or not-for-profit organisations isn't always easy, even when we know it's the right thing to do. And many of us who are in councils will know some of the difficulties of doing that. And today's discussion is around how our communities and local government can work together on this asset transfer piece. So if you look inside the report, and we're delighted with the finished product, one of the things we've done in there is made some strong recommendations for central government that will help local government and our communities to do these transfers that we feel with our cooperative values are so important. So I hope you enjoy this morning's webinar. We are going to hear from some of our speakers now, and I want to start by introducing a great friend of the network, Baroness Glenys Thornton. Glenys is a long-standing friend of our network. She's a very proud Yorkshire woman, and she has been previously a health minister and is shadow spokesperson for health at the moment. But one of the things I know from long conversations with Glenys is that she has a really powerful interest in social enterprises and how social enterprises work. So that makes her a perfect person to speak on this subject. And I know back in the day, Glenys, you were political secretary of the Royal Arsenal Co-operative Society. And your roots are very firmly within the cooperative movement, and you joined the Cooperative Wholesale Society and worked there. You've also been General Secretary of the Fabian Society, and we're delighted to welcome you here today and to thank you first for your support for our network, but also to hear from you about the subject that we've of our report today and for our launch. So welcome, Glenys, lovely to see you, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. I really like the Co-operative Councils Innovation Network, and the reason I like it is partly because it's led by Sharon, of whom I'm a great fan, but also because it links two really important words, which is innovation and cooperatives. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to sort of at least cheer you on today. And also perhaps just think about the challenges that we face here to make progress with cooperative innovation. And so I'm a Labour and Co-op peer. I actually joined the Co-op in Bradford, where I grew up when I was 16 years old. And I'm I think I'm probably about 5th or 6th generation Co-op. And I'm also now the chair of a relatively new, couple of years old, Cooperative Innovation Trust, which has been rolled out of what was the Phone Co-op. And I'm a patron of Social Enterprise UK and E3M, which is a network of social enterprise leaders who are one of your supporters, or on that list of the supporters of the Innovation Network. The challenge, I think, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentations that are about to follow here. The challenge is, how do we get people to think about these sorts of issues? Asset transfer doesn't exactly sort of send your eyes spinning with excitement, those words. They are ones which need explanation. They are very, very important, and they're not new. I mean, when we were first setting up Social Enterprise UK in 2001, I went to Scotland and worked up there with Scottish colleagues, and they were very keen on the asset transfer that has helped to save land in the Highlands and Islands and so on. But we face several problems and the challenges that we face. One is actually getting government to recognise that this is that cooperatives, mutuals and social enterprises are an important and sustainable part of coming out of COVID and rebuilding our economy. I think they're absolutely vital. The second one is actually getting our colleagues across councils, the people who've actually got the powers to do this, to realise it's doable and to make it as easy as possible to do. And one of the challenges that I think we've got in Parliament, and I work very closely with the co-op group and the co-op party group, is actually trying to make sure that the legislation that's going through also certainly doesn't hinder or stop, but hopefully will help to grow the cooperative solutions that we think are so important, of which this is an important part. And I'm not really going to say very much more, but I'm just going to say those are the challenges I think we have. When I first set up Social Enterprise UK, I might be the first parliamentarian ever to have used the word social enterprise in Parliament. Not sure about that. Nobody knew what we were talking about. They certainly know what cooperatives are because we have been around for a very, very long time. So we don't have to overcome that barrier. But I'm really sorry. I live near the Royal Free, and that's an ambulance that's just gone by, which you can probably hear. I always thought that one of the ways we get social enterprise recognised would be if a social enterprise nursery appeared in EastEnders or something like that. And I just think that one of the challenges we always have in the cooperative movement is how to actually make it easy for people to understand the benefits and the values of what we're talking about. And that, I think, will be one of your challenges too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenys. That's wonderful. We really appreciate that. And you're right. And one of the things the report does very clearly is sets out what the opportunities are of asset transfer, but it also very clearly articulates some of the challenges. And I think that's really helpful. And also what government can do to help remove some of the barriers, or to help actually ease the path for some of the asset transfers that our councils, even when we want to do it, and my council does, we find that it's much more difficult than it should be. So that's part of the purpose of the report today, is to illustrate what those challenges are or articulate them. So I'm going to hand over now to John Copps from Mutual Ventures. John's going to give us an overview, an oversight of what is actually in this report. So over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, and good morning. I'm John Copps from Mutual Ventures. We're a small consultancy and we aim to make public services better by working with councils, with NHS organisations and with mutuals and social enterprises. And we help to make them more sustainable and connected to communities. And we're really proud to be part of the Co-operative Councils Innovation Network and work with Sharon, colleagues, and all you members who are listening. So as Sharon says, my job is to give you a sense of what's in here, to look at what works and what doesn't in community asset transfer, and to reflect what I think we've heard from members through the calls to evidence in 2018 and 2020 and numerous discussions we've had. So I think as our starting point, and what everybody wants, is to build strong, resilient communities, and community assets, whoever owns them, are critical to that. And what I want to say, and what the report argues, is that community asset transfer is a tool for ensuring effective use of these assets, and it's a tool that all councils should consider. So just to sort of state the obvious, but community asset transfer is the transfer of land, buildings or assets to the ownership or management of a community or third sector organisations. It's not new. But it's never been a better time to think about this as an option in your area, as Glenys has said, and as the examples show, which we'll hear later and also in the report. And the rewards here are really big, so it is something that I urge people to think about. So what works? What works in community asset transfer? I want to pick out 4 things. First is to councils a positive community asset transfer strategy and vision. So some councils have formal policies around this. And if you look in the report at the back, there is an example of that from Newcastle. And that is focused at, those policies must be focused around social value, and they must attract positive support from councillors, from communities, and the wider colleagues in councils and public services. And our colleagues later can tell you all about that. But community organisations say that it's only with shared aims with the council that you get success here. My second point is around capacity within the community group. So transfer works best where there's existing management committees, structures, experienced staff or volunteers, and there's a governance process already there. And there's examples, and I know Size Townside are one of the members who've joined us today on the webinar. There's a great example in there around libraries transfer to a third sector group, which has allowed extended opening hours and new activities. The third thing I'd say is good relationships, because there will be sticky points along this way and you'll have to be patient and learn together. One particular approach is a sort of duty of care from councils to the organisation where assets have been transferred. And to give the example of South Tyneside again, they have a third sector strategy and have invested in the tools that they need to empower those organisations to work and to be sustainable. And I think, as Sharon has said, COVID-19 has showed these relationships at their best, and the fact that the working with communities and with councils together is how we get effective local services. Fourthly, I want to say is the evidence of a sustainable business model and adequate financing. So very straightforwardly, to provide the confidence that the transfer will be successful in the longer term. So that's what works. What are the challenges? So most of the challenges I think are practical in terms of knowledge, support and capacity. So have you got the right people with the right know-how, and do you have the ability to bring in external support as you need it, because you will need it? Second is this kind of a realistic assessment of those resources, the funds you need and the time taken. So I think you need clear expectations at the outset around what those issues might be, and a need to invest in project management and in legal costs. There will be some red tape. You will have to wait for legal advice, for quotes for work, for condition surveys, to make sure buildings are safe and secure and ready to transfer. So it's not always a straightforward process. And I think those expectations need to be understood. And I'm sure Joyce and Gray can tell us a bit more about that in a minute. Thirdly, I think on the challenges is the focus needs to be on social value, not on saving money. It's about value for communities. It's about a cooperative approach with communities and with councils. And then fourth, I just want to say a bit about the legal issues. So interestingly, legal issues are seen as a barrier, but when none of the respondents to our call to evidence cited the lack of statutory powers as a barrier in actual fact. So it's more of a perception really. Now I'd sort of echo what Glenys says, that legal framework can be improved, because it doesn't exactly encourage transfer, but it doesn't, once you get into the process, it isn't really a barrier. So that will bring us to some, as long as you get the right advice there and you get the right legal expertise. So finally, that brings me to some of the recommendations for central government from the report, and you can read these in more detail in the document itself. The recommendation for government to invest in the capacity and resources for community asset transfer at a local level, to use funds such as the Levelling Up Fund and the Community Ownership Fund, which is yet to publish its prospectus, to seek strategic opportunities for asset transfer aligned to economic growth. Then I'd say there's other ways to make the process easier through model documentation, through replicable models that can be used. So learning from elsewhere and make that more available. And then there's the legal issues to strengthen the provisions, particularly in the 2011 Localism Act. So the community right to bid could become a community right to own, and increasing the time period that communities have to raise funding for assets. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour. So in conclusion, I would say that local government has an important part to play in the bridge with communities. And so 3 words, I think: vision, relationships, and capacity to create a sustainable future for community assets. And so the aim of this report is to inspire you, and I look forward to hearing from the examples. And so if I just leave you with a question for all councils: if you haven't considered asset transfer, why not?
Thank you very much, John. A very good and concise overview, which we thank you for, of the report. And you know, what shouted out to me from the report, one of the things when I've been reading various drafts of it along the way, is the issue of funding. It's very easy for councils to look at this as potentially we've all got very difficult budgets to set, and to look at this as a way of saving some of our funds. But you need to, it really is an invest to save. You've got to put the right resources in for the community to develop that capacity, and you're quite right to highlight that from the report. I did also want to mention that there is another funding stream which maybe people want to consider, which is the Community Renewal Fund, which is also there. We've got a very significant bid into that for community wealth building, and that's part of that whole process as well, about renewing our communities post-COVID and supporting them to do the kind of things that can be greatly assisted by these buildings, whether they're recent ones that we want to look at transferring, or whether they are buildings that have been out of use for a long time. So I'm going to now hand over to Joyce. So thank you, John. And I'll now hand over to Joyce McCarty, who is the Cabinet Member for Inclusive Economy at Newcastle. Joyce has very recently, and we're very grateful to her, has put her name forward. We have 2 main governing parts of our governing structure in the network. One is the Executive Oversight Committee, which I chair. The other is the Values and Principles Board, a very important part of the way we work, because that board oversees the way that we hold to cooperative values in the network. And Joyce has taken over as the chair of the Values and Principles Board. So we're very grateful to you for stepping up and doing that for us, Joyce. And we're handing over to you now for your case study from Newcastle Community Asset Trust. And we look forward very much to hearing about, this is all about what our network's about hearing from you how this has worked out there on the ground in Newcastle. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and to Glenys and to John for their contributions so far. I'm going to set a little bit of context, I think, first, which a bit follows on from what Sharon has said, and maybe is a bit challenging to what John is setting out in terms of why we have done this, because we've lived through austerity for the last 11 years and indeed previously, and some of the examples that we've got in front of us are as a result of councils having to make difficult decisions about reducing their spend, but trying to do that in a way, in a whole range of different ways, which actually result in stronger communities, greater responsibility for individual members of the community's boards, greater opportunities for volunteering, which I think contributes to that strong, resilient community that John talked about. And I think part of that is also about greater accountability, and it's about developing new models, I think, that meet the priority needs of our local communities. Some of the cuts we've had to make have resulted in much better services, much more effective local spend, and improved support and services for our residents. And therefore, because we're coming at it from a slightly different angle, doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. None of this could happen, of course, without the support both in the council and indeed from the network. In particular, I want to thank Adam Tager and Caroline Conson, who have led this work on behalf of the council. And also to add that what we call assets, some call liabilities. You know, the community and voluntary sector often say to me, you know, whilst this is an asset in a local community, it's also a liability for those who are trying to manage it and run it.
And sometimes that's around champions that exist in our local communities, reliant on one or two individuals. So we've kind of constantly got to have an eye on what we need to do to broaden that support and make sure that we can, as a council, ensure that assets are used well, maintained, safe, have sustainable business model for the benefit of the users. All of that is about co-production. Our approach has been for council officers to work with those local organisations, community groups, delivering social value locally. And I think the experience over the last year through this pandemic has been astonishing in terms of the level of support, the fantastic support for residents across our city who were really, really struggling. Of course, part of me wants to say we don't really know how effective all of this is yet, or how much impact it will have in the longer term, because these things develop and grow over time. But so far, I think the impact of this has been really good. So our model was the example that's included within this, the case study, is some work from a centre, a community centre that was built in Blakelow, a pocket of deprivation surrounded by, in some parts, better off housing, and owned by our Almo and the City Council, and therefore it was a bit complicated. But the local councillors wanted to work with the volunteers who were running that centre to, it is a fabulous building. It's a hall, it's offices, it's meeting space, it's a library, a kitchen, really, really good opportunity to develop wider support. And years ago, the councillors in that area wanted to secure its future and were just exploring different commercial opportunities to run in a community centre to make sure that the community centre had ongoing income to support the work that they wanted to do. I think that hard work they brought in a post office, which is now a thriving opportunity. They've now got Mrs. T's tea rooms, which are brilliant. The food there is excellent and affordable for many local residents. The volunteer library that's run there, and a post office. And it's a post office that was at the core of providing the commercial income that helped to secure the building in the longer term. Of course, all of this needs vision, drive, passion. You've got to believe that you can make a difference. You've got to have a little bit of an off-the-wall idea too, in order to come up with this kind of approach. But ultimately, what you want to do is make a difference for our local communities. And all of that was hard work for the local residents in the area, particularly those who were running the centre. Of course, it did take funding from the City Council, from Newcastle, our Almo, and the small amount of ward funds. We don't have huge funds in wards, but the local councillors can make those kinds of decisions. I guess that is about democratic engagement. This is all about innovation, and it's about community leadership, really, and a different role for local councillors. We have learned from that. We have to think about what went well. It was led by the communities team in the council. It was led by the Blakelow Partnership volunteers who worked for that, and the local councillors joined up, able to bring together the right partners and make a difference. It was complex because of the mixed ownership. John has highlighted the legal, technical difficulties, which actually local communities, most of us wouldn't understand about leases and what difference all of that needs, or how much you need to understand all of that, and whether they're long or short leases. I don't even understand what the difference is. But some of that is about making sure that we can find a way through that quagmire of detail in order to get the best outcomes for our local residents. There are issues about building safety and management, as John highlighted. Oversight of capital spend. If you want to make a difference in the building, you've got to secure a commercial premises, got to be secure. That's different from having a meeting space. But the partnership were really lucky in that they employed an ex-council employee who knew how to manage their way around the City Council structures and organisations, who to talk to in order to make a difference. And I think that helped them, I want to say, walk the talk and accepting that things could be done in a different way. They've now become the Newcastle Communities Asset Trust and now run a further 2 buildings in the local area. And they did do the most amazing work throughout the pandemic. But I want to also be really honest with all of you who are taking part in this webinar. We've got that as a really, really successful example of asset transfer, but we've also got less successful ones. Another successful one, a pool that was closed in the early 90s, reopened by the local community, continues to work extremely successfully. But a pool locally in my area has not been quite so successful. The community who originally set it up were brilliant, set it up and it worked, and it was very, very effective. That's not the case for them now. They handed the keys back to the council about 18 months ago. At the same time as that, those keys were being handed back to the council, another community organisation was setting up a pool in another part of the city. So actually we've got to learn about the ongoing changes, the way that we need to support others, and recognise that we're not always going to be successful. Sometimes even, you know, with a huge amount of support, local things like that are not, they're just not going to work. And we've got to recognise that. So I think our approach has been open, transparent, but also about listening and learning together. We're accepting that we're going to get things wrong and that we've got to be a learning organisation. I think some of the aspects of the report are really, really clear about that. That if we really truly want to learn about what difference we can make so that we're delivering exactly that social value that we all respond to, we've got to recognise that we can learn from each other and we can do things differently next time. So, Chair, I just want to say thank you to the network for funding this work, to the officers who were involved in pulling it together, to other councils for sharing and contributing to the report, which I think adds depth and breadth to the opportunities that are there. And maybe just finally to say that the network has been really valuable in enabling those kinds of studies, that bit of research which councils wouldn't necessarily have the ability to fulfil themselves, to bring together reports like this so that we can all learn, see the successes, accept that sometimes we're going to fail, but let's learn from all of the work that we're going to undertake together. And I'm really pleased that we're setting out some asks of government too. It isn't just for us in local government or those of us who are involved in the network to lead on this work, but it's about learning right across the local government family and seeing what we can do differently next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for all the work Newcastle have done on this report. And can you please take our thanks back to Nick Forbes, your leader in Newcastle, who has co-authored the introduction to the report at the very start of the piece of work that we're publishing today. Nick's always been a great supporter of our network and carries our message. He's the Labour lead on the Local Government Association and carries our message through the LGA on our behalf. So we're grateful to Nick. And lots of work that you and your team have done there in Newcastle, Joyce, which is set out very clearly in the report, and that's a great help to the rest of us. You mentioned the policy labs and prototypes that we have funded through the network. The bigger our network grows, we use our membership fees in good co-op style to fund these ongoing pieces of innovation work, and we're delighted to be able to do that. And the bigger our membership gets, the more of that work we can do, which makes my heart sing that we're able to fund our councils to do the investigation and the work and the research on the work that supports our network. And we don't mind. Some of those things are really successful, and we get great success stories. But we want to know when they're not as well. That's really important to us. So if people try something out and it doesn't work, the fact that it's funded by the network just gives a little bit of support to those councils who want to really experiment and do things that are really different. So, so that's great. Thank you again, Joyce. And we're going to hand over now to Gray Hill, who is the director of Insole Court Trust at Cardiff. And Gray's going to tell us about our next case study, which is from Insole Courts in Cardiff. And this gives us the other dimension of this operating under a devolved administration as well. So over to you, Gray. Look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be able to share Insole Court's journey through community asset transfer and beyond with you. I have a presentation, so if you'll give me just a moment, I'm just going to go ahead and share our screen. Okay, so hopefully you've got the presentation on screen. So like I say, my name's Gray Hill. I've been the director of Insole Court here for the last 3 years, and I've been here since we went through community asset transfer and opened to the public back in September of 2016. So starting with the basics, what is Insole Court? Well, we're a grade 2-star listed mansion and gardens with a rich history and a vibrant events program. After an extensive refurbishment, it's now run by an independent charity, the Insole Court Trust. But what is it that we do? Well, the mansion and stable yard are hired daily for classes and activities, corporates and private events. Visitors can wander through the ornamental gardens, visit the mansion's exhibition, and stop by the Potting Shed Cafe for a cup of coffee and a slice of homemade cake. We're a heritage attraction, a cultural event space, a licensed wedding venue, but we're also a charity. We utilize the mansion and gardens to improve the lives of our visitors. So, how did we get here? Well, I'm going to take you through our journey in 3 parts, starting right the way back when Insole Court was built in 1856. So it was built by James Harvey Insole, originally as Ely Court, and he modified and expanded it over the following decades until it became a grand Victorian mansion, as you see pictured here. Fast forward to 1932, that's when Cardiff Corporation, as they were then, acquired the mansion and land under a compulsory purchase because they needed it for housing and for road infrastructure. Now, originally the site had about 60 acres of land, and the council paid £25,000 for the mansion and 60 acres. So a bit of a steal, although I'm sure that some people in the council would have argued that they've been paying for it ever since. But immediately after that, we started having an administrative, a civic function. And in the Second World War, it was used for military administration, housing the Royal Observer Corps, the Auxiliary Fire Service, and our local air raid patrol. And over the many decades that followed, when we became Insole Court, we continued to be used for accommodation. The upper floors and outbuildings were divided into apartments and rented mostly to council employees until the 1970s, when sadly those parts of the site were abandoned. Though the ground floor continued to be used as a public library and a community centre up until the late 2000s, when the house was closed on health and safety grounds and the dereliction really began. So the campaign. This is a major part of Insole Court's story. It originally began in 1993 when members of the local community formed the Friends of Insole Court, a campaign group to save the neglected building. And they campaigned for the next 2 decades until, through the support from National Lottery Community Fund, then Big Lottery, the Friends of Insole Court were invited to start the community asset transfer process, and they founded a registered charity, the Insole Court Trust. The following year, we appointed a project director who was an external consultant who led the charity through its early years. And then in partnership with Cardiff Council, the Trust began the Insole Court Renewal Project, securing £4 million from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, CADU, the Welsh Heritage Organisation, and various other funding bodies. We closed the mansion in 2014 to begin our redevelopment. And I'm now going to show you just how we spent the money and what we did in our community asset transfer. So starting with our outbuildings, the stable yard facilities, you can see just how advanced the dereliction had got. Most of those buildings didn't have any roofs intact. They'd been arson attacked over the years. And as you can see, we've been able to regenerate them into modern facilities that can be used by the community, by local businesses, and for private events. That's a view of the other side. The large iron fencing and gates that used to stop people from accessing that site are now all gone, and it's become a vibrant hub for the community. Believe it or not, this is our cafe as it was before a much needed haircut. It's amazing that we were able to save so much of the site when the easy option, of course, would have just been to knock it down. Now, the majority of the funding that we had was spent on the stable yard facilities because they were our core income generator, and we opened that part of the site first. But we were able to spend some money on the mansion too. A little bit more low level, some of these repairs, but as you can see, this is our dining room, for example, and we've been able to lift it and give it purpose. The room can now be hired for dining events, but it's also a fabulous meeting room and boardroom. This is actually the room I'm speaking to you from now. This is our reading room. In the Insole's day, it wasn't a reading room, it was their smoking room, but it's quite hard to have that in a 21st century visitor attraction, so we've given it a modern purpose. So I'm just going to take you through the last few years. So as I mentioned, we opened in September 2016 in phases. Community asset transfer took place and we were able to open the stable yard and potting shed cafe. Staff were brought on board at this point and we started generating our own income. At the time, the trust employed just 3 staff, myself included, alongside around 10 volunteers. The following year, we opened the ground floor, free to visitors. And we hosted our first public events, including outdoor markets, concerts and talks. In July 2018, we opened our paid exhibition called This House is a Stage. It's an innovative walk-through audio drama that transports 21st century visitors to a 19th century world. We also became a licensed wedding venue. In September 2019, we expanded again, taking over the operation of our cafe and becoming a food and beverage business. The trust now employs over 20 staff and relies on over 100 volunteers. This is an image of just how busy Insole Court can get. This is our annual food festival called Bite. Of course, we haven't been able to run it these last couple of years, but we get about 10,000 visitors in a single day. Not bad for a site that was previously unknown and derelict and has now become part of Cardiff's cultural landscape. So I'm now just going to finish by taking you through some advice that we give to other community asset transfers. First of all, the partnership with Cardiff Council, in our case, is a long-term one. We have about an 80-year lease, so about 75 years left to go, but it takes sustained effort from both sides. I think there had been a view from some that after the transfer had taken place, that it was now in the hands of the trust and was most of the issues were ours to deal with. Equally, I think that there was a view from our side sometimes that it was ours now and we could do what we like with it. Of course, neither are true. And I'm grateful for the ongoing support that we've had from Cardiff Council, but it does take continued effort from both sides. I'd advise you not to bring your staff on board too late. My first day in September 2016 was the day we opened and I was the second appointment. It was a cost-saving measure, but it meant that we had to build the bicycle while riding it. So if you can, bring your staff on board as early as possible because they're going to be vital to your development. Ask yourself how you can prepare for those staff coming on board too. Because often with these sorts of projects, the group, the charity, the trustees, whoever you may be, in the run-up to your community asset transfer, you're probably doing absolutely everything. I remember the first time I met our treasurer, he was cleaning the gutters here at the mansion. That ends once your professional team are brought on board. So be ready to step back from those operational duties and become strategic. There are some governance principles that take an awful lot of work. So be ready for that. Ask yourself, who is your community now and how will it change once the project is complete? Are you casting the net much wider? Do you have your critical systems in place ready for opening? Do you have the IT, fire and security critical systems in place to be the business you need to be? It's very difficult to put those in retrospectively after you've opened. And finally, don't ever stop communicating with your stakeholders, even when you're busy. That's definitely a trap that we've fallen into in the past because we've been so busy with our heads down, getting it up and running, making it work. At times, we've stopped being communicative. Now we're trying to be an awful lot more outward facing. And I think hopefully me speaking to you today is a good part of that. So thank you very much again for your time, and yeah, look forward to any questions.
Wow, what a fabulous example, Gray, and we wish you every success with the future. We're starting to see some common threads coming through this now, but your really valuable advice alongside Joyce's of actually having done this and learned from the experiences you've gone through, really valuable. And what a beautiful place you've created there. I've got a farmhouse in Stevenage which I'm looking at, and we're thinking about how we're going to do this going forward. At the moment, it's got a £750,000 maintenance deficit, but you've encouraged me, because it probably pales into insignificance compared to what yours was. So you've encouraged me to have another look at that and think about how we might do it. So really inspiring. Thank you so much for that. We've also seen in the chat some really good examples particularly from Rochdale and Birmingham. We need those for our case studies, Rochdale and Birmingham. So if you can get those to Nicola, that would be fantastic, because we're about to produce a new case studies pack in time for the party conference season, which will start in September. So if you can get those case studies to us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have a number in the document, but the more we have, the better. Great, a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. And we're going to open up the session now for a Q&A session. We did have some questions submitted in advance, so I'll start with those. If we don't get to all the questions, because we've got just about 10 minutes or so left, please carry on putting your questions in, and we'll try and get answers to you in a written format. But the first question, which was submitted in advance, was to Joyce and Gray about the case studies. And that is, why do you think some places haven't seized on community asset transfer as an opportunity? We've got some of the pitfalls set out, but we'll start with you, Gray, because you're on the screen at the moment. So why do you think people feel so reluctant to do this?
I think in our case, it's been a long journey, and the trust, the Insole Court Trust, was founded 5 years before the transfer actually took place. I know, talking to some of our trustees who have been here through that whole time, is that it really was very daunting for them at the beginning, because they knew that it was going to take over a significant chunk of their lives for some years. We're 10 years on now from the trust being founded, and I still think in many ways we're only at the very end of our first phase. This is a long-term commitment that relies on thousands of hours of voluntary time, and I can totally sympathize with those people who look at these examples and think, well, that's wonderful, but we can't commit the time, or we don't have the resources for it. So I think if you can get that early support through funding, through local government, through organisations like National Lottery Community Fund, they do enable you to do that research and development, so you can take your first steps. But yes, it I'm afraid isn't an easy process, but hopefully, as you've seen, it is worth it. Yeah,
it looks definitely worth it. Joyce, any comments from you on that question?
I think it goes back to the my comment about an asset is fantastic, but it's also a liability, and there are clearly concerns if your organisation isn't strong enough to take on that liability, because actually you need financial skills and building skills and venue management skills. And whilst there are lots of people with those skills who volunteer their time willingly, you don't always have that kind of collection around you. And I think it picks up on Gray's point about the partners being involved right from the start and being willing to test things out and pilot ideas, collectively, and understand that sometimes it isn't going to work and sometimes it will.
Yeah, thank you. I was one of the localism commissioners with Sir Bob Kerslake a couple of years ago, and we went all over the country talking to people about, and this subject came up quite a lot. And it was very clear to all of us that different communities have different levels of capacity, and one of the real things that the councils can do, I think, is help support. I think you mentioned this in your talk, Joyce, is help support the communities that don't perhaps have the assets. And if you're perhaps a village community, you've got a village hall and the village is full of retired or recently retired solicitors and finance people, it might be much easier for you to take on that asset than in some of the communities that some of us represent. So that's a really key role for councils, I think, in supporting and helping our communities to do this. Glynis, I know you have to rush off to the House of Lords shortly, so I have a question for you. So I'll put your question next. And that one of the questions that came in was, what do you see as the potential for community assets to really improve the lives of people and communities?
I mean, it's sort of like the fundamental question, isn't it, of cooperatives and social enterprise, and it's about people having control and democratic control of the parts of their lives, their jobs, their homes, the land they live on, the communities they live in, and being active participants in what happens to them. And for 2 or 3 years, I was fortunate to be the chief executive of the Young Foundation. I took time off from the front bench because the Andrew Lansley bill nearly killed me, and went and ran the Young Foundation for 3 years. And one of the things that we were doing at that time was actually looking at communities to see what the strength and resilience of those communities were, and it was and leadership. And actually, there are very few communities, however deprived they are, that don't actually have assets in them, and I'm talking about human beings who aren't prepared to help their neighbours and their communities. And it's so one of the things, and we actually worked in down in Wales, we worked in Leeds actually, and various other places, Bucky and Dagenham. And one of the things that was completely clear to me, and I think it's something we should remember, and that councils can really help with, is actually identifying and developing the people in their communities, even in those very deprived communities, to find out what it is that they can do and how they can do it. So it's really it's part of asset transfer, but actually I think it's a very hopeful way of getting the leadership you need to make these things happen.
That's really helpful. And yeah, your point about there are assets in all communities, and you're absolutely right. And one of the examples that we saw on the Localism Commission was a really deprived community in Manchester, where a very powerful community activist had just kind of twisted people's arms up their back and got them involved in this project. And they'd taken over, I think it was a shopping parade from memory, and turned it into a community asset. And it was a fantastically powerful project. So you're quite right, there are assets in all communities. I'm going to take a question from the chat line now, which is from Rachel. Hang on, let me just find it. I've lost it again. Let me just find the question. From Rachel Stringfellow. Rachel says, what are the views of the panellists on community shares as a mechanism to raise finance to fund remediation works or other investment in community assets? John, as you gave us the overview on the report, perhaps you'd like to start us off with that one.
Yeah, I think this gets to the point of how you pay for investment, which is always required into these assets. And I'd be interested in Gray and Joyce's examples of that. So community shares are, for everyone, a withdrawable, non-transferable share capital that is there to raise capital, but it's specific to co-ops and to community benefit societies or charitable community benefit societies as part of that legislation. So it pays interest, but it can't be transferred. And it also allows a democratic way of voting. So it doesn't matter how many community shares you have, you still have a say in the governance of an organisation. So as a means, it's one option. It's one option, and there are examples of it working really well, and there are examples where it doesn't work so well. So I saw a statistic around those organisations that have used community shares. 92% of them are still around. So it does have a high success rate, but there are specific, it's it's useful in specific circumstances. It might be in other examples you want to get a loan, maybe from a commercial bank or from a social investor or from the council. And in other cases, you may not need that level of finance. So really, it depends on your situation. I don't know if Gray and Joyce have anything to add to that from there.
Yeah, do come in, Gray or Joyce, if you want to add to that.
Okay, it's not something that we've gone through ourselves here. I mentioned that we were fortunate enough to have financial support early, enough for us to bring in the consultant to lead, but also to undertake some of those initial works, and found the charity. We're also quite fortunate that we're in a residential area here. We're surrounded by housing. So there already is quite a considerable sense of community ownership of the site. And because it had been derelict for so many decades, most people who'd lived in the area were already engaged, were already on board. If we were going through this process again, though, and perhaps we didn't have the kind of resources available to us, because I appreciate we're in a very different climate now, it's certainly something that we would consider. It sounds like a great way to get buy-in from your community, but it's not something that we have direct experience of. Okay,
thank you. Joyce, any thoughts on that from you?
I think that has been tried, although I don't know very much about community shares themselves. So I think, what Gray has just shared around getting investment from your local community, I think we certainly tried that before. I think it does, in terms of what we can do through local government, I think our voluntary and community sector infrastructure organisations are really important in all of that, and our ongoing support for those, our local, ours is called Connected Voice, and they're really, really excellent, keep up to date and support us. And the other challenge I think we've got with all of this is the language that's used. What do we mean by social enterprise? What's a not-for-profit? We need to have some kind of clarity, I think, about all of these things describe something similar, because what we're talking about is local communities coming together to support important buildings, assets, people in their local communities. And I think that some clarity around the language. It would be great if we could just use one set of jargon rather than 20 sets.
Yeah, that's always an issue, isn't it, with anything we do, and I think sometimes I think of local government as a jargon creating industry, because we do a lot of it. It strikes me that one of the useful pieces of ongoing work we could do from this report is to particularly look at some of the financial models, particularly the kind of cooperative models like the one that John's just explained to us. I think many of us, I know Insole Court were lucky enough to get National Lottery funding. There are all sorts of funding pots that we might be able to have a look at. And if you've got any case studies on that, please do let us know what they are. Also, Christopher Robson from my next door council, North Herts District Council, has put a question in the chat about community engagement on these kind of projects. So anyone that's got any expertise in that, please do contact Christopher, and if you do have expertise in that, please let us have your case study so that we can put those in the next case study book. It seems to me this is a topic that's going to that today's webinar has opened, and I always think a webinar is successful if you end up with more questions at the end of it than you had at the start of it, which is always good as far as I'm concerned. I think we've had a terrific launch of our own document today. We've been able to see some fantastic case studies from Newcastle and from Cardiff. John's given us a magnificent overview of the report. If you haven't got a copy of the report, please let us know and we will send you one, but it will be on our website, so you will be able to access it there. And I think we may do another session on this at some time in the future. In the chat, we're seeing people looking at all different models, and there's quite a lot of talk about leases and how we structure leases for good community asset transfer. I think that's important. So I think we'll roll this forward for another discussion, perhaps at one of our sessions, and we'll put it in for some further examples from those councils, and we've seen lots of them in chat who are flagging up some of the work they've done in their own areas. I'd love to hear about those, and I'm sure the rest of our membership would as well. So, but we are at our time now. Glenys has had to rush off to the House of Lords. We're very grateful to Glenys for participating, to all of our fantastic panellists, to John, to Joyce and to Gray, thank you. As ever, a huge thank you to Nicola Nicola Huckabee from the network for getting this all organised for us today, and to Charlotte and John for the work they've done on organising it today. And thank you to all of you for participating. Our network is all about the people in our councils and in our affiliate and associate members. So let's have your case studies, bring them forward. This is a unique piece of work that we've done here, and we'll be leading and innovating as our councils do across the country. So thank you very much for your attendance this morning, for your time, and for the innovation that continues to emerge as we drive this fantastic network forward. We're very grateful to all of you. Thank you all very much indeed.